Mr. Rogers, a name that may spark joy in your heart or understanding of those around you. Mr. Fred Rogers spent most of his adult life training to become a minister. However, as fate would have it, he would find himself being steered away from that course ever so slightly with a new invention sweeping the nation. The television and its programs were sucking people into its world, showing them everything from comedy to tragedy. The one thing Fred saw when he watched it was how much of a waste that it all was. To Mr. Rogers, there was so much potential in TV, especially for young learners, that he had to do something about it. So that's what he did. In 1953, he went to the public television station WQED and pitched a show called Children's Corner. Didn't expect that, did you? Mr. Rogers didn't start with his own show. He worked with a huge cast of people along with a child psychologist, Margaret McFarland, who helped build the framework for the show that we all came to know later on. Eventually, in 1963, Mr. Rogers was encouraged to step out in front of the camera. He had been working behind the scenes up until this point, and started 15-minute segments where he talked to kids. This concept eventually evolved into the media-driven show that we all know today as Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. The show has a very smooth format for each of its episodes. Mr. Rogers would come home singing the oh-so-familiar song, "Won't You Be My Neighbor?" After he finishes his song, Mr. Rogers would subtly bring up the topic for the episode, or the week. These topics ranged from expressing yourself through art, or heavier concepts like the divorce of your parents. From there, Mr. Rogers could be visited by several guests who talked to him about those topics, and from there, they transitioned into the neighborhood of make-believe. In the neighborhood of make-believe, a cast of people and puppets talk about the episode's topic, singing or finding ways to resolve the issue. Once the segment ends, we transition back to Mr. Rogers, who sings a song and does an ending talk about how special you, the viewer, are. As you may know, Mr. Rogers was a man who loved everyone. He wanted to spread his message of loving your neighbor to everyone. This meant during his broadcast time, he would address social issues. In the very second episode, the citizens of the neighborhood of make-believe are faced with a border wall and a war. During a public outrage about integrated swimming pools, Mr. Rogers featured a scene in which he and Officer Clemens, an African-American cast member, shared a small pool and washed their feet together. The show never shied away from controversial topics of the day, and readily took on the challenge of explaining to children the things that they may find hard to understand about the world. You may ask, why is Mr. Rogers so special? Well, funny for you to say that, because to him, everyone was special. Mr. Rogers took talking to children in a different direction from most shows at the time. He spent long swaths of time to be quiet and to listen to the questions the kids had. The way he went about making the show was at the time the exact opposite of what all children's programs were doing. He was slow and exact. He often would tell people not to improv on his show because he wanted to make sure that the message that they had crafted the whole episode got across to the children. Every song, every character, every broadcast was not for an audience. It was all for one person. It was for you. The show was all about teaching children about their social and emotional needs. He wanted to make it clear to all kids everywhere that they could be themselves, and because there was no one else like them in the world, that made them special.